Advertising technically would be how well you as a business you interact with your clients. People think of advertising as simply brand awareness, but the right way to think of advertising is customer satisfaction. If someone out there who runs these brands is watching, they know that advertising is not just littering our streets with your logos. Advertising is about talking to the customer and satisfying the customer, and also listen to the customer to know, what exactly they want. When you talk to your friends about when you're dissing your friend's shoes, like, hey, did you see the other chick at the party? She had the weirdest shoes. Meta is getting that information to know, okay, what I'll tell whoever the design of those shoes are is that this kind of design, people don't like it, right? So that is the new form of advertisement, is where the advertiser is learning from you sort of without your consent. Hi everyone, welcome to the Uvotam podcast. This is our second episode of the podcast, and in this episode we are going to talk about advertising, how and why it works. In the initial episode, we laid the groundwork on why we are doing this podcast. The actual idea is turning our business Uvotam into a story, and the goal is to convince you, if you're a marketing manager, if you're running a brand, if you're an influencer, if you're a solo entrepreneur, our goal here is to convince you that you actually need a podcast to tell your story, to tell the story of your business, to turn your business into a story. A big part of what we talked about in the previous episode was why podcasting is the ideal platform for advertising, and not just a platform to run ads through, but to actually run your entire branded podcast as an ad. And in this episode, what I want to talk to you about is the nature of advertising. Why it works, how it works, what we know from the data, what kind of advertising is there, what's the most optimum form of advertising, and so on and so forth. So yes, with me today is my co-host, Glenna. Glenna, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Hi, everyone. Hi, Kenneth. I'm excited to dive into this with you. So, Kenneth, what is advertising?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think when most people think of advertising, most people are thinking of posters. They're thinking of billboards. They're thinking of the voices on radio that tell you to buy a product or tell you how to find a product. Most people are thinking of maybe short videos that display what a product does. And yes, indeed, that is advertising. But that is just a small form of advertising. Advertising is not really about bombarding the world with your brand or putting statements out there of what problems you're solving and so on and so forth. Advertising technically would be how well you as a business you interact with your clients. I can give you a good example of where I think a big company gets advertising wrong. And think of not Coca-Cola. Think of MTN, for example, here in Uganda, right? MTN spends a huge amount of money on billboards. It spends a huge amount of money on running TV ads, on running radio ads, and it also spends a huge amount of money sponsoring things. Say, if you go to Nyege Nyege, for example, if you got festivals like that, they're sponsored by MTN. If a lot of concerts are sponsored by MTN, this and this is sponsored by MTN. And what MTN ideally gets from that is to make more people aware of their brand, right? So that is an efficient way of advertising, fine. But what MTN doesn't do, where I think it could even be more efficient, instead of spending, or on top of spending all this money on brand awareness, on the form of advertising they're doing, MTN can also spend more of its money on customer support, right? And this is how you think about it, right? So today, if you had an issue with your network, something, and you call MTN, they're going to put you on hold for about 10 minutes. And you're going to be frustrated. If you have the patience, if it's something very important, if someone has stolen your mobile money or something like that, you're going to stay on the phone. If it's something else, if you want to inquire about their own product, if you want to inquire, how do I give you money to give me this service? And they keep you on hold for 10 minutes. You just give up and say, to hell with you guys. Yeah. What MTN is missing is what if it had turned customer service into a way to engage, not just a way to get complaints from customers, not the traditional way customer service is done, but a way to engage with their clients, to know more about what their clients think about their products and so on and so forth. If you think about the way MTN structures itself in the country, it's a monopoly or duopoly, it's MTN or Airtel. You don't have a choice when it comes to the services they provide. And for that, I think the reason why they do their customer service so terribly is because they know anyone else who's going to try and compete with them almost has to do it entirely the same way they're doing it. So they don't really have room to innovate. But if you look at the way the trends are going right now, for example, in Kampala, 10% of people say are texting anymore, using SMS, right? The majority of people are using WhatsApp to send messages. Fewer people are making phone calls within Kampala, right? Most people are calling via WhatsApp. That means this trend is likely to grow to other cities and then to grow further to the rural areas, right? But MTN, which, as first pusher, MTN or Airtel, as the first pusher, while they had the chance to conquer the internet market as well, because they have terrible customer care, they've provided room for others, right? So if you go to Chanja, just Chanja one, if you go to an apartment block in Chanja, there are about, say, 7 or 8 internet fiber providers, right? MTN is one of them, Airtel is one of them, and then, Canal, Savannah, so many others. Because there is room there that most of these other providers have seen where they can compete with MTN. And in my opinion, the reason is MTN has failed on advertising where it's essential, right? So while obviously, if I go to Nyega Nyega, I'll see that MTN has fiber, they'll advertise that. When I'm back at my home, I feel frustrated with MTN when I'm calling them to ask them about SMS bundles. They don't have that room to engage with me. What they could do alternatively would be start a periodic podcast, right? So they get requests from their customer care line, then maybe sit down with their marketing manager, start a 2-hour podcast where they allow people to call in and share their views, something interactive where the customer feels like, oh, MTN is actually caring about me, but also where they get that genuine feedback. And they know, if a customer is using Savannah, they know why the customer has chosen to use a different brand over them, something like that. And this, again, is mostly because people think of advertising as simply brand awareness. But the right way to think of advertising is customer satisfaction. If, for example, here at Uvotam, we can advertise, we do advertise now on Google, we do Google ads, but our biggest form of business comes from a client we've worked for telling his brother who's getting married next year that these guys worked for me, I like their work, use them for your wedding as well as your photographers. And this is, this is generally what almost all businesses are about, apart from, of course, the monopolies, right? So if you think of banks, competing in that field is hard. So a lot of those companies think that they don't have to engage into the word of mouth kind of advertising. But still, when services change, the reason that Airtel Money disrupted banks so much, the reason mobile money disrupted banks so much is because banks didn't have that connection with their clients or with the actual audience that they're trying to serve, the potential clients, to know that maybe people don't want to come and open bank accounts. Maybe people just want to send their money like SMS, right? But they could have done that. They could have beaten MTN, they could have beaten Safaricom to the mobile money thing. And this is, I think, where we are trying to, here at Uvotam, the point of this podcast, again, is to convince people that podcasting could be that one approach that maybe banks hadn't considered, that maybe big brands hadn't considered, that actually is the best way to advertise to your current customers, to let them know that, hey, we are thinking about your problems and we are trying to solve them, but also to advertise to potential customers that, hey, if you haven't yet opened a bank account with Stanbic, you can actually use our product called FlexiPay to send money like mobile money, right? So we want to make sure that if someone out there who runs these brands is watching, they know that advertising is not just littering our streets with your logos. Advertising is about talking to the customer and satisfying the customer, and also listen to the customer to know, what exactly they want. And in my opinion, that is the right definition. You asked me, the question is, what is advertising? And in my opinion, great advertising is work that is satisfying the customer, and that's listening to the customer, and that's talking to the customer. That is what advertising is. Yes.
I feel like that's really good. It would really build brand loyalty among customers, yeah? Okay, so advertising on the internet. Tell me about computational advertising.
Yeah. So when I was giving the example, I was giving about with when it comes to what MTN is doing, for example, or what they're doing offline, right? If you drive through Kampala Road, you'll see a lot of KFC posters. You'll see a lot of, maybe CJs. They also advertise a lot. You'll see Coca-Cola posters. You'll see banks. You'll see telcos. And that's one form of advertising where, you put your brand out there. First of all, the goal for that is to make sure people know that your service is there. So, if a tourist came to Uganda and they were looking for where to eat, they know that Cafe Javas is there. But also to reassure people who eat at Cafe Javas that you're actually a serious brand. You invest a lot in your image enough to put your posters on the street, right? And the reason this has an impact, if you went and ate in a Kafunda and you got a bad stomach, you have nowhere to complain. You can't go on Twitter and say, I ate this Kafunda next to Lucky 7 supermarket, up the mango tree. No one will know what you're talking about.
I feel like that's actually a non-disclaimer. Once you eat in Kafunda, you'll be ready for a possible stomach
ache. Exactly. Yeah. So part of the advertising they do on streets, part of the branding they do on the streets is for Cafe Javas to tell you that we actually invest a lot in our image, so you should trust us. If we don't serve you the right way, you can mess us up because, this is how much you care about our image, right? That is an efficient way of advertising. But now when it comes to advertising online, the game changes a little bit, right? So online, the game it's more computational, yeah? So there are big companies like Meta, like Alphabet. Meta is the one that owns Facebook, Alphabet, the one that owns Google, and a lot of other companies whose actual job is to calculate to know what is the most efficient way to distribute brand information to people who are using the internet, right? So when you go and scroll through your Instagram, you're laughing with your birthdays and so on and so forth, Meta is getting that data to know that, this person probably in the future, they may need to eat from Cafe Javas, right? When you talk to your friends about when you're dissing your friend's shoes, like, hey, did you see the other chick at the party? She had the weirdest shoes. Meta is getting that information to know, okay, what I'll tell whoever the design of those shoes are is that this kind of design, people don't like it, right? So that is the new form of advertisement, is where the advertiser is learning from you sort of without your consent, right? So when it comes to, to the first approach I was talking about, where you engage your client directly, you get their consent. People come and listen to your podcast and they know what you're talking about. They know about your business, about your product, and so on and so forth. But the alternative is they can just mine your data, right? So Google will just mine your data, Facebook will just mine your data and try to understand your preferences, and then sell that information to, say, Cafe Javas to know, to sort of target you, to make sure that whenever you want to eat fries or chicken, you think about Cafe Javas, or to sell your information to MTN to make sure that whenever you want to buy better internet, you consider MTN over Savannah, over any other brand, right? And this is more computational. So this is more sophisticated way of targeting, where companies like Meta collect this micro data about you, data that you don't know that you're living around. When you go to the internet, you don't know that Meta knows how fast you type, right? You don't know that Meta knows when you doze off. If you're scrolling through, say, your TikTok, and then you doze off in the middle of the TikTok knows that this person has dozed off, right? A lot of that behavior that you're not even conscious of yourself is being collected by these companies, and the goal is to process this data into the kind of information they can sell to people who are selling products to sell to you. So one of the people would be maybe telling an influencer to produce a certain kind of content, right? So they say, TikTok would tell influencers that if you produce content that's more than 2 minutes long, people are more likely to doze off, because we've actually seen people dozing off at 1 and 38 minutes. So if you want content that people watch through and through, compress it within 1 minute, right? And so when you go back on Instagram the next day, you find yourself sleeping much later, sleeping at 3 a.m. And you know what people are saying, that the apps are becoming addictive, right? This is all kind of advertising. The problem with this computational advertising, obviously, is its intrusive nature, right? The fact that you don't know what Meta knows about you. You don't know what Google knows about you. You don't know what their actual intentions are, right? The easier part would be Google is telling you to buy a pair of sneakers, right? So they've put this information out on a bid, and they're like, hey, if Nike, you pay enough money for it, we'll give you the information. And then they sort of trick you to choose Nike over Adidas. Yeah, you are going to buy a sneaker anyway, but you're buying from their best bidder. That is one easy way, which is business as it is. But then the other way would be if they're tricking you into buying political ideas you don't want, right? If they're tricking you into, keeping quiet when there are injustices in the world, things like that. This is all a problem with the computational form of advertising. Is you don't know what the advertiser knows about you. You don't know how the advertiser is using your information. You don't know how the loop is coming back, how the advertiser is actually influencing you in the end, right? You just know for sure that as long as you're using your phone, the advertiser is listening. The advertiser is collecting all this data. You don't know what kind of data, but the intrusive nature is you don't know which part of your decisions online or offline even are now because, of your own decision making around you and your own society, or it's because there's a manipulation in the back door from the advertisers trying to trick into, looking a certain way. Are you wearing extremely expensive Gucci over Chinese shoes that do the same thing because you actually have money, or because Google has convinced you that wearing Chinese shoes is bad, things like that. And that is a scope of advertising. So one scope is you come into the real world, into the physical world, put your brand out there, let people observe your brand and then make decisions. And the other scope is learn the people who you want to advertise to slowly by slowly, and then try to manipulate them into what you want. So those are the two forms of advertising. And I think both of them, neither of them is a good form. Obviously the offline one is much better for the consumer, but the only problem with that is it's not as efficient, right? The one where you're being manipulated instead is more efficient, and it ends up winning because more businesses are willing to pay where they see a clear return rather than, where they're doing the right thing, right? It's just the way business works. And so, yeah, the question is, where is that line? Where do you split the difference, right? And podcasting, I think the point of this podcast and the goal for this podcast is to encourage people to know a bit more about how podcasting can bridge that gap, right? Instead of one way you think about this is something I learned from Laurie Sutherland, the video I was showing you, right? So traditionally, when you bought a newspaper, part of the fee for printing that newspaper has been subsidized by Volvo, right? So in the middle of the newspaper, there's an ad, for Volvo, by Volvo, right? Part of watching a program on TV for free at home is, this program can only exist if in the middle of the program, they will tell you, this program is sponsored by MTN, right? Yeah, and even online to some extent, part of like watching, say, the Joe Rogan podcast is going to break halfway within the podcast and tell you, buy this supplement and so on and so forth, right? And Facebook would also make the same argument that part of using Facebook for free or part of using WhatsApp for free is because when you go to Instagram, we are going to put a small banner with an ad. The advertiser is who is paying for the free service. right? And if this is offline, the offline model, this is a good contract you have with the advertiser that, okay, give me that information, and I'm a willing consumer. You take my attention, I consume the information, you tell me about your brand, and the end, let me watch the soap. I want to watch my Telemundo. In the end, let me watch my Telemundo. I get entertained, and the contract I have with you is, okay, now you can tell me about your SMS bundles, right? So that is a clear interaction that you have with the brand. But then, when it comes to things like billboards, right? Because there's no consent. I'm driving in Kampala, I'm going to do my own thing. I don't want you telling me about SMS bundles because we don't have that agreement, right? So now you have an agreement with a third party. You have an agreement with a city or with the national government. And in the end, me, your actual target, I'm a bystander, right? In my approach, that is not very ethical, but that is the way things work. But it even gets worse. So when it comes to online, when it comes to using Google, when it comes to using Facebook, when it comes to using Twitter, and so on, instead of even violating, so Twitter would say, okay, you're using Twitter for free. In return, you pay us, rather you give us money so we can advertise product. The advertiser is the one who's paying for this product because Twitter is running on servers and so on and so forth, and we need to pay people who are making Twitter stay alive, right? But now the only problem that Twitter is doing is getting sneakier. So Twitter is now not telling you, first of all, what they're learning from you, right? So Twitter, for example, like Twitter is actually a good example. X now, X is a very good example. If you're on X and maybe undecided about which political party you want to vote for, you're undecided about, say, Bobby Wine and MK, right? For example, if MK paid enough money to X, Twitter can start feeding you information because they know where you are in your opinion. So they know this is what you don't like about Bobby Wine. This is what you don't like about MK, right? So if MK paid Twitter, Twitter will start feeding you information that would slowly manipulate you into thinking, oh, maybe the things I don't like about MK actually not that bad, or he's flexible about them, right? So it manipulates you slowly towards one side, right? It's a form of advertising, right? This could be, again, a shoe. This could be, I'm talking about politics now, but it could be a shoe. It could be you're undecided about your Nike and your Adidas. And if Nike pays the amount of money they have to pay, Twitter just changes your feed to make you think that the world thinks that Nike is the better product, right? Yes, there is that opaqueness where only one side has all the information, and you, the consumer, you're in the blind. You're just being sort of manipulated blindly, and so that is that's how worse advertising can get, right? Now, this form of advertising that we talked about in a big part in the first episode is using the podcast, what we are doing right now here. Uvotam, our tagline is only humans tell stories. And our goal basically is to clean up the stories in society, right? So the society is full of good and bad stories. And I think personally that the only way to make better society is not to stop people from, believing bad stories, yeah, but is to clean up those stories, to reimagine, to retell those stories in a good way, right? Sort of like what would be a bad story? If you read, say, the Bible, right? If you read the book of Genesis, Moses wants to leave the land where the Israelites have been exiled forever. And so what God does is he kills the first son of every Egyptian, right? So that is a terrible story, right? If I tell it to you from that perspective, that's a terrible story. You can't imagine God that built things like that, right? Yes. But now, at Uvotam, what if we had to think about the same story, a story of thinking of redeeming your people from slavery that doesn't require that kind of vengefulness, that's more tricky, that's more that requires a little bit of cunning, a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of wit, things like that. We create a comedy that sort of is telling you it's teaching you the same lesson that the Bible is teaching you with Moses' story, but it does not include that supernatural, vengeful kind of character, right? So that is, I think, what we want to do. And again, a part of storytelling, advertising is a big part of storytelling, right? Because I think Jojo Relu says all art is propaganda, right? A big part of storytelling is I want to pull you into my tribe. I tell you about the God of the Israelites because I want to make you a Catholic, or a Jew, right? Is it the Judaism? I want to turn you into Judaism, right? So I tell you about the God who heals people, the God who does. That's the point of the story, right? The same thing is when I show you a short video of this guy enduring to run like 100 miles, wearing my Nike shoe. I'm trying to sell to you that, hey, if you wear a Nike, you could be the kind of person who has that spirit, the spirit of the runner, of the marathon runner, things like that, right? This is the essential nature of storytelling, and advertising is just a part of storytelling. And we think that the only way to clean up stories is to get that feedback loop. The reason why, first of all, it's even taboo for me to use a biblical story as an example of what a bad story looks like, is because the Bible is written and handed to me, and I'm not allowed to give feedback, right?
Take it as it is.
Yeah, take it as it is. And this is the same thing with advertising. When I see a Nike ad, if it offends me, I either hate Nike or I just ignore, right? But that's the way it's delivered. It's delivered as take it as it is. The story is delivered that way. But with podcasting, we open up that loop, right? So I come here, I talk, I tell you my philosophy on podcasting. What people are going to do now is comment or like or ignore on Twitter and YouTube and wherever we distribute our podcast from. And my goal is when I look at that, I improve my podcast to reach out more or to address some of the comments, things like that, right? And so I'm advertising my product, which is Uvotam. What we do here at Uvotam, a big part of it is actually we do podcasts for other people. That is what I'm advertising. But my form of advertising is more interactive. It's more wholesome. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to make my case and hope that you agree with me. Or if you don't, you give me enough feedback so I can improve my business. So, we can reach at a place where we agree. That's
build a connection of some sort.
Yes, that is the goal. Yes.
Okay, that's quite excellent. So who, in your opinion, should be in charge of advertising in a company?
I see, yeah. So again, here at Uvotam, we're a bit unstructured. I don't think we have like specific roles. Usually it depends on where the gig comes from. If the gig comes, today the guy was the editor, is the project manager, tomorrow is, as it is. But I think in a typical company, most companies hire a marketing department, right? So if you're working at a big company, if you're working at a bank like Stanbic, there's a department that's where it has people who went to school to learn how billboards work, how to run Google ads and things like that, who are in the marketing department. I'm actually not sure what people study in marketing, so I hope I'm not offending these people. But, there's a department of professionals whose role is to learn marketing, right? But now, if you look at companies like Apple, right? The Apple, the original Apple, the guys who invented the iPhone. The way they used to advertise, they still do it now in a way, but before Apple was known for not doing so many ads. So Apple wouldn't, you see, for example, right now Microsoft has their logo on the team that won't be going for Champions League. Yeah, but Apple and Microsoft, actually, even Microsoft by then, they were not known for doing that because the people who advertised for those companies were the people who were building the products, right? So you had Steve Jobs at that point, who was also the idea of what it means to be what? To work at Apple. So that is what you had. And Steve Jobs did the actual marketing of the Apple product himself. You understand? So what happens is, if the person doing the marketing is actually the part of the product team, if it's the person building the product, if in MTN, the person who's leading the internet product is the one who is in charge of also marketing that product, not an external department that is skilled in so-called marketing, then these people know for sure who this product is for, what the story for that product is, and they can shape this very well in form of a what? In form of a podcast. And so, yeah, in my opinion, it should be the product department that does the marketing.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. This was a really lovely learning experience. Stay with us for the next episodes. And if you didn't watch episode 1, please go back and check it out. Let us know of anything in the comment section.